Hi everybody and welcome once again to Capricorn Radio with your host James Swagger, and I'm going to be joined today by Mr. John Anthony West. And John is no stranger to Capricorn Radio. He's been on in January of this year, and I guess a lot's changed. We're going to get an update from John in a minute. The reason I got John back today is I wanted to talk about another book of his, The Traveller's Key to Ancient Egypt. I have a revised and updated edition, and this is no ordinary guidebook. This is a serious wealth of information on ancient Egypt. And I guess the first thing, I don't normally remark about the physicality of books, but this book, I think it's intentionally designed to fit in your pocket. It's an elongated book. It's taller and less wider, so that I just can't wait to go to Egypt with this thing because it fits in your back pocket. I think it's one of the greatest things for a book to physically fit in your pocket. It's certainly a guidebook, and it's chunky and it's nice and it's packed with info. So, if you haven't heard John's previous show, please log on to the archives. John's got his own biography page there. So without further ado, let's bring on John. John, welcome to Capricorn Radio.
Why, thank you, James. It's nice to visit again.
Yeah.
And by the way, you're quite right. The book is not only is it designed to fit in your pocket, but it's designed via sacred geometry to fit into your pocket. It's exactly a 2x1 rectangle,
yep,
which is the basis of the golden section. If you draw a diagonal across the cover of the book, it's in what's called the phi ratio to the length of the phi ratio to both the width and the length.
Well, that's what I love.
So it's entirely it's a...
Somebody took time to do that, John, and somebody, that's ingenuity for me, and that's like, I didn't know that when it came in the post, John, I was like, oh, how cool is that? It just dawned on me, fits in your pocket, a guidebook fits in your pocket.
Yeah, well, that's right, but it means that your pocket is harmonically designed as well. See, the 2x1 rectangle is the basis of the King's Chamber and it's the basis of most of the naves of Gothic cathedrals and so on. So it's entirely deliberate, but it's also functional. It does fit in your pocket, and you can carry it in your hand.
Only a Cancerian would think of that, John. Only a Cancerian. So, John, for those that don't know you, you're an independent Egyptologist, and you've been writing and researching ancient Egypt for decades.
Yes.
Maybe just give a brief. We have a lot of new listeners all the time, John, and, I guess the last time we talked about your book, The Serpent in the Sky, and that was the one that really cracked it for you, I think, and put you on the map. But, John, if you're going to research ancient Egypt, and you want the real ancient Egypt, the one with the symbology and the explanations and, the thought-provoking answers, we got to go through you, John, because you're a titan in the field of ancient Egypt research.
Well, yes and no. Put it this way: on Symbolist Egypt, I'm accessible, but all of my work, or virtually all of my work, is based upon the magisterial reinterpretation of ancient Egypt developed by the great genius with the unpronounceable name R.A. Shvala de Lubitsch.
Sure.
The Temple of Man. But de Lubitsch, like many really great original and creative thinkers, was not a great communicator. Often that's the case. They're operating at a level that they do not get to even the average educated reader. So with me, I'm a writer by trade, really. I'm a creative writer by trade. People don't know that much about me, that I started out as a novelist, playwright, screenwriter, essayist, etc., reviewer, and became a scholar almost by default when I came across Shvaller way back in the 60s. But because I'm a writer by trade, I can communicate better than Shvaller could. So it's through me that you get to Shvaller if you're prepared to take a couple of years out of your life and battle your way through the now translated. It wasn't translated when I started working on it, the Temple de l'Homme, the Temple of Man. So yes and no. You might say I'm probably the most, not necessarily the most knowledgeable, but the most visible of the Shvallerites, of the symbolist authors. But we're now a small sort of cottage industry. There are a number of people, for example, who know more about the geometry and the number symbolism than I do, and others who know certainly more about the hieroglyphs, which I don't really have any mastery of. But anyhow, look, I guess, not even because of my book, but because of the Sphinx theory of the whole idea that the Great Sphinx is many, many thousands of years older than it's supposed to be. That's well known. But even that is an observation made by Shvaller at the end of a long chapter in one of his ancillary books, talking about the Egyptian belief that their civilization stretched many, many thousands of years further back into the past. And at the end of this long chapter, which was all based upon textual references to mostly the Greco-Roman writers of the 1st and 2nd centuries BC and AD, Shvaller comes out with his bombshell line. And of course, the Great Sphinx of Giza shows unmistakable signs of aquatic erosion, water weathering. And when I read that, the penny dropped in the slot, and I said, if you can prove that, and that's a geological question. It's not an Egyptological or an archaeological question. If you can prove that, you turn all of ancient history upside down in one fell swoop. End of argument.
Sure. And you've done, John, and you did that.
That we've done. Yeah, well, it took me quite a while before I found Robert Schoch. What?
You didn't do it overnight, John, but yeah, you did that.
Oh, no. But also, you see, I mean, I developed the theory on my own, and I'm not a geologist, so a lot of research went into that. But, I could make mistakes very easily. I didn't make too many big ones, but I developed that when The Serpent was first published in Serpent in the Sky in 79, I guess. And then, nobody paid any attention. I mean, you said that put me on the map. No, it didn't. It was a book that had a tiny little underground following. It was known in certain esoteric circles, let's say, but by no means public. And then eventually I found Robert Schoch. That's another big, long story that, in fact, Schoch and I will be co-writing a book soon.
Really?
About the whole Sphinx theory, yeah. We're going to have fun with this, about the whole battle that we've been fighting all of this time, and which now, pretty soon, is going to come to an end because the water weathering, as far as we're concerned, has been established, but the establishment is refusing to acknowledge that it's valid. But we now have, I don't know, I can't remember if we talked about this in the earlier show. Probably did. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. Did we talk about that?
Oh, we talked a little bit about that, John.
Anyway, that's the smoking gun, because this is this amazing site with 22, only 5% excavated, but ground penetrating radar shows us that there are, I think it's 22 closely adjacent mini Stonehenges, stone circles, but they're not so many. I mean, the central pillars of these extraordinary, sophisticated structures weigh between 12 and 15 tons, and the whole site, very mysteriously, was buried around 8000 BC. So the archaeologist in charge himself, Klaus Schmidt, a solid German archaeologist, he dates this to 10,000 BC or earlier. Well, this completely upsets the apple cart and basically corroborates indirectly our redating of the Sphinx. It means that even if people were hunter-gatherers in those days, they were very smart hunter-gatherers because they'd wrestle around 12 to 15 ton blocks of stone and carve them elegantly without any other tools, apparently, other than flint knives. So this is a real mind blower. So this...
I've had Schoch on, actually, since I spoke to you last, and we've got...
Oh, you did? I didn't know that.
Yeah, I've had Dr. Robert Schoch on, and he's a fascinating guy. He was so delighted that I dissected his work and had a good... I regurgitated it back to him, and he appreciated that, and I did a...
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, Schoch and I have been colleagues for a long time, but the story of finding Schoch, I don't want to go into that here, but it's a really interesting story of how cautiously he came on board, and now he's gone...
He's blossomed a good bit, hasn't he?
He's written a number of books on the subject, but he's, completely changed in terms of being this super cautious academic to, a real, let's say, an intellectual or scholarly adventurer.
Yeah.
Fearlessly and putting his tenured neck on the line to support all kinds of interesting, if it's science, and it's corroborated, and the evidence is there for it.
Yeah.
He lets the chips fall where they may, which is crucial. Because I don't have any letters after my name, so the quackademics have no compunction about ignoring whatever it is that I say. But Schoch is less easy to ignore.
Yeah. He's a titan in his field in one.
Yeah, very much so.
His book, Forgotten Civilization, the role of solar outbursts, I think is.
Yeah, that's the new one. That's right. Yeah, well, we feel we're zeroing in now on some of the details of the lost civilization, which before we only had the broad picture, but now. With the solar outbursts somewhere around, what does Schoch put it, 9,700 or so BC, something like that. And then earlier than that, about 1,000 years or more earlier, there's the asteroid or comet strikes that bring on what I think it's called the Younger Dryas, which is a much colder snap at the end of the Ice Age, and then the solar outburst that puts an end to it, and that melts all the glaciers and rises the ocean levels. And, sets the stage for...
I know Graham Hancock's going to do Fingerprints of the Gods too, John, and I know he's going to concentrate on the comet impact, maybe melting the ice sheets. Does that fit in with the picture, John? Would that...
We think not at the moment. No, we think, Schoch anyway, thinks that they're two separate events. I mean, Graham wrote Fingerprints of the Gods back in the early 90s, I think, before there was all of this talk about solar outbursts and things. So the theory, I mean, this is typical of science and scholarship, is that you refine the theory as new evidence comes forward, and sometimes you have to abandon the theory. I mean, if it doesn't fit, but this is now beginning to fit, although I would say the evidence for the solar outburst is still more circumstantial. I'm not sure if Schoch would agree with this, more circumstantial than it is hard evidence, but there's an awful lot of circumstantial evidence. And that's, of course, what Schoch goes into in forgotten civilization.
And, and I think, I know Shock's been over for Göbekli Tepe. Well, I presume he has. I think there was...
Oh, sure, yeah.
There was a Turkey, kind of civil thing going on at the time he was supposed to go. It was a conscious...
Oh, he went. Yeah, he went. Yeah.
Conscious of that, but, I know there's a couple of authors to concentrate on, but I think Shock, more than anybody, has more to gain than to go in there. Because, there's people putting their pennies worth in there, but for Shock it means more, is what I'm trying to say. For Shock it means more. This is the pottery shards that they were wanting.
You bet. That's right. Yes, Lehner is going to... This is a very interesting time coming up now. And Mark Lehner, I'm afraid Mark Lehner...
Whatever happened to him, John?
He's very much around, as far as I know. We're civil to each other when we meet, but we're certainly not great friends. And Lehner, this is a more story that Shock and I will get into in our book, which is called, by the way, you may know the reference, not many people will, Dancing Down the Bridge of Sirah. Sirah, do you know that image?
No.
Shlomo de Lubitz talks about it. It's a Sufi image, and in order to get to the truth or enlightenment or the goal or however you want to describe it, the end of the spiritual quest, the Sufi say that you have to travel across the bridge of Sirah, which is described as narrow as the razor's edge, and on one side is the chasm of credulity, and on the other is the abyss of skepticism.
Right.
So this is really when you're on this kind of scholarly quest, it's a perfect image, because on the one side you have the New Age loonies who will believe anything, and on the other side you have the rabid debunkers who will refuse to believe anything, no matter how good the evidence is.
There's a fine line in the middle, John. You got to walk that fine line.
Not only is it a fine line, but it's a curvy line. It doesn't go straight either.
That's true, John. That's very true. And that's true for anything, not just Egyptology, but science and history.
Sure, anything. That's right.
And I think you're right, John. These are very exciting times. Let's go to Egypt, because the last time I spoke to you, you were about to head off for a trip to Egypt. You've probably been twice since then, probably.
I have actually been twice since then, yeah.
What's new, John? What's developments there? What's happening?
Well, I'm watching them very carefully. From the very beginning, I forget, I'm on radio and TV a lot, so I forget who I said what to. Okay. But I was there for the entire revolution. You know that, don't you?
Yeah.
Back in 2011.
Yeah,
and actually, people, somewhere along the line, I'm sure you give people my website and everything, but if people go to my website, which is jawest.net or jawest.com, there are audio blogs on there called Phoenix Fire. And the last one, Phoenix Fire number 10, is called The 5-Star Revolution, which is about our adventures in Egypt during the revolution.
Awesome.
We were the only tourists in Egypt because we refused to get out of there and listen to the stupid government. One of my mottos for living happily in the middle of the madhouse is whatever the government tells you to do the opposite. Anyhow, we were there for the entire revolution. And of course, I've been following developments ever since. So now, even at the very beginning, I said, whatever this baloney talk about democracy is, no matter what happens, the military is not going to give up its perks, and it is not going to give up its position of power to any group whatsoever. And now it turns out that this is true, but the military also, you listen to the bullshit about this is a demo, even the Muslims, there are Muslims, and then there are the Brotherhood. These are the Muslim imbeciles. This is a different quality of Muslim, just as there are Christians who are actually practicing Christianity in a few monasteries still stuck around the world. And then there are the Christians, the rabid pit bull Christians, the southern senators and southern governors who are raving mad and want everybody, to practice their barbaric form of non-Christianity. So anyway, the army in Egypt is not like the army in the Western world. It's really kind of a pale version, you might say, or a throwback to the time not so long ago, even 19th, 18th centuries and back through European history, because of primogeniture, where if you were of the aristocracy, and the aristocracy, it's a bad rap, but for a long period of time, a lot of the aristocrats took their jobs seriously and, did their best. Not all of them were barbarians by any means. So the eldest son inherited the whole estate, be it a duke or an earl or a squire or whatever. And so that was the eldest son, and the next son got nothing, or inherited nothing. But the general rule was that the second son went into the military, and if there was a third son who went into the church or into academia. And so there's a kind of an aristocracy to the military that doesn't exist, certainly not in America, and not much in Europe anymore. But in Egypt, It's somewhat similar to that. It's not exactly like that. But anyway, the military, particularly the upper levels of it, have a
different dynamic in a way.
A different dynamic, and they're trusted by the people. Even to this day, I mean, even there was a poll the other day that I saw that even the not so much the Brotherhood, but really Muslim religious devoted Egyptians still respected the military and expected them to do right by the country. So we'll see, because it's something of a boiling point.
I had heard that before, about the dynamic of the military in Egypt, and
it's different there.
Yeah.
And anyway, but I've said right from the beginning that the military is going to determine what's going to happen here. So there's now a lot of huffing and puffing going on, because the Muslim Muslim Brotherhood and the rest of the stupid Western world is talking about the election that put Morsi in charge as being a free election. Well, there's no more free, in a sense, than an American election where you have somebody like the Koch brothers or the billionaires who are supporting the corporate, big corporate powers that are pouring money in to support a candidate who's going to do their bidding. And more often than not, that candidate wins because they're outspent and outpromoted, or they have outspent and outpromoted any of their challengers. Well, that's not really a free election. Well, in Egypt, the Brotherhood had absolutely no say in the revolution. They stayed in the sidelines while the other people got killed and mounted the barricades. And then afterwards, because they had a long-standing underground but real organization, they moved in, and the protesters were a bunch of mostly young people with no real organization. They just knew that they wanted Mubarak out. And so they were completely disorganized, and the Brotherhood with their organization moved in and squeaked by the election with the tiniest of majorities. And now there's all of this bullshit going around that this is a free election and we have to support democracy and all this sort of stuff. But we will see. My sense of it is, and I could be wrong in this, but my belief is, and also my hope, I have vested interest in this, needless to say, that the army will impose a truce of some sort, that the Muslim missiles will accept, maybe with some violent outbursts, but they will be obliged to accept it or else. And Egypt will muddle along somehow or another, at least until the next shoe falls.
Sure.
Because the situation is almost unfixable. In other words,
they can't go back. They can't go back to where they were at, and they just have to argue out the details. I think, John.
Well, you see, the point is, it's really an economic thing. They've got 85 million people living on a land that, as it stands now, could with difficulty support 50 million, and they're adding 1 million or something to it every year. Actually, when I had dinner, I know Zahi Hawass pretty well, and people think that we're still enemies. We used to be bitter enemies, but now we're actually very even friendly to each other. Even though,
well, Zahi, where he's at, what's happening?
Well, Zahi is in some sense or another back. He's not back in power. He doesn't want to be back in power. He doesn't want to be. He doesn't want a ministerial position. He hated that, actually. He likes being a field archaeologist and and discovering stuff. But we had a dinner on one of those trips recently,
sure,
and with one of my groups, and somebody asked him about the situation, and Zahi said in this this strong accent, he said, "Egypt needs a dictator," and he's right. But he's right.
It might not solve the problem.
I mean, a dictator, it's Western democratic imbeciles. A dictator is always bad. But no,
Look, John, in the UK we have a dictator. She's called the Queen. But
well, yeah, but she doesn't exercise any real power.
Well,
she has lots of money and she opens up a Coca-Cola factory or something. I mean, she didn't really do anything.
Still got a two-party dictatorship that's under her.
Well, this is true. It's the same in America. It's a two-headed one-party system.
Yeah.
But there's not one person who says we're going to do this or we're going to do that. So, I mean, Egypt needs somebody who probably, tries to stem the terrible population explosion, probably by instigating Chinese draconian laws about having kids. And then the next other solution is actually ecological and environmental. There are real possibilities for Egypt. I mean, with all of that sunshine, they could supply all of Europe with solar power. And there are also wonderful desalination projects that are working already in Australia, where they could reclaim the desert through desalinated water. So it's actually salvageable if the right people were in charge. So we'll see. They might not get in charge.
Okay, John. Big question. What do you think the chances of getting underneath the paws of the Sphinx for the little chamber that's there? Do you think?
Very, very small. Very small in part because it's physically difficult to do. I mean, you could stick a little probe down there and get into it, but the water level, it's all full of water now. So even if you had a probe in there with a little light on it, you're not going to see very much. And to excavate it, you have to dig down, and the Sphinx is gigantic, but it's very fragile. I mean, it's really badly weathered and weak. And to go down there, excavate down there, and you'd have to pump the water out. You have to construct a kind of a coffer dam and pump the water out faster than it's coming in. It would be a nightmare. Yeah. And it's not impossible, but it's not the seismograph tells us there is a chamber there, and that it's almost certainly man-made. Although we haven't, because we were being kicked around from pillar to post when we were doing our seismic work back in 89 or whatever it was, 90. We couldn't. There is a chamber there because it's cut in the bedrock, so there has to be an entrance into it, and we never found an entrance, but we also weren't able to do as much because, as I said, we were being chased all around, mostly by Zahi, actually.
I would like to think that somebody else is going to come along who's a bit more open, that would allow a bit more research to be done, or a bit more. I don't want to see another Zahi Hawass step in and control everything. And
well, yes and no.
I just had Robert Bauval on the show, John. So Robert Bauval's no fan of Zahi, so.
Well, believe me, Bauval, it's mutual.
Yeah.
Zahi hates Bauval.
Sure.
I mean, he's really rabid about Bauval. But see, we're working now. I'm trying to get Zahi. See, for years, since we buried the hatchet, Zahi and myself, on the personal level, I've been trying to get Zahi personally with me to the plateau to show him the evidence firsthand. He's never really, he's read it and things like that, but he's not really followed.
Have a chat man to man about it and just say, look.
Well, we've had a chat, but I want him to go with me to spend a day going to the plateau and then to Saqqara and maybe to Dashur, where all of this evidence comes together. Because my feeling all along, not all along, but for the last X number of years, has been that he could change his mind. And if he, in his position now where he's not back in power, in other words, he's not back in power academically, but he's still pretty much the voice of Egyptology to the outer world. If he even went so far as to say this is really worth studying, further study, that would be big news. And shocking, we're trying to get our follow-up, The Mystery of the Sphinx, on, we're trying to get the funding to get this done and to do the further research, to bring the panel of geologists to settle this matter of water weathering once and for all. But Zahi could be a major player in that. And my feeling has always been that he is deep down less doctrinaire than some of the other guys. Laner will go down with the ship. Right. And if he comes up for air, I'll be on a lifeboat to push his head back under.
But look, Zahi's a Gemini, isn't he? He's a showman, so there was always a little bit of a showman in him, but I take that showman.
Oh, a lot of showman. He's mostly showman.
Typical Gemini male, but I mean.
I'm not sure what his,
Oh, he's a Gemini. I know his.
You sure of that? Yeah?
Yeah, I can see why because you're a Cancer, John, I can see why the Cancer and the Gemini males always seem to get on. The Cancer males and the Gemini women don't, from what I see, but the Gemini males are.
Actually, I, from personal experience, can corroborate that as a generalization. Anyway, but we'll see. I mean, there's really interesting developments on the immediate horizon, and we'll see how it falls out. One thing is certain, as far as I'm concerned, as far as Shaka is concerned, as far as an awful lot of people are concerned, that the Sphinx theory is not going to go away. And so, on that basis alone, all of ancient history has to be completely revised in terms of the kind of sophistication, intellectual, philosophical, spiritual sophistication was available to very, very ancient peoples. And that's a game changer because Schwaller has a great line somewhere, which is that everything in the universe is organic. Everything goes through its cycle. Every new idea starts from a seed. And an acorn falls to the ground. For the oak tree to sprout, the husk has to crack. And then there's a period of chaos where there's really not one or the other. It's sort of a jelly. And then if the situation is right, up springs the little tendril, the little oak shoot that will eventually, if it's nurtured, and not trampled into the ground by some wandering jackass, it will become an oak tree. Well, we're in that kind of position now. But the seed must crack. The seed is the intellectual, philosophical Church of Progress establishment, as I call it. So it's very important that gets discredited in order to clear the ground so that a new civilization can spring from the seed. And this is an analogy, but it's a very good analogy. It's a very appropriate analogy. That's what all of this work is about. In other words, this is why the Sphinx theory is as important as it is, because on the one hand, you can say, well, who cares if the Sphinx is 10,000 years old or 40,000 years old or 60,000 years old? At that level, it's just, let's say, a quibble between academics. But if suddenly you realize that the entire, you might say, philosophical basis of modern thought is at risk, because not at risk, is threatened, and is vulnerable to the Sphinx theory and all of the things that extend out from the Sphinx theory, Göbekli Tepe, the solar outburst, all of this stuff fits in. So in order for the seed to sprout, the husk must crack. And so that's why we put so much attention into chasing this one down, we hope, to its denouement.
Do you know what I wish, John? I wish that Egyptology would embrace some of this some of the archaeoastronomy or some of the ancient technologies that these guys had. I wish they would embrace that a bit more.
Well, it's
and ditch the copper chisels.
A few individuals are churning a little bit, but basically Egyptology, it's sort of a logjam in the river of truth that leads to the past. It is the most pig-headed of any discipline that I know. I mean, when I first met him back in the 80s, and he's an academic, and he thought me ranting and raving all over the place about the Egyptologists and how pig-headed they were, that I was exaggerating. And so long before we went to Egypt for the first time, but I was trying to indoctrinate him. We went to an Egyptology conference in New York City. And when we came out, Jacques was, well enough, he was shaking his head, wondering, and he said, you weren't even exaggerating. I mean, some years ago, there were a whole bunch of jokes about the world's shortest books. Do you remember those jokes about the world's shortest books?
What's that?
Oh, well, like Who's Who in Puerto Rico and a biographical dictionary of Italian war heroes. There are a whole bunch of world's shortest books. The shortest of all would be New Ideas in Egyptology.
Sure. Gotcha.
And maybe even equally short would be Welsh gourmet cooking. But anyway, so they won't. The Egyptologists, most of them will cling to the paradigm as long as they can. This is a wonderful line of Victor Hugo, the famous line. There's one thing stronger than all the armies in the world, and that is an idea whose time has come. Famous line, right? The corollary to that, which Hugo didn't think of, was the second strongest thing in the world is an idea whose time is not yet gone. And the nature of establishments is that the armies of the world, in this case it's the intellectual and academic armies of the world, are the guardians of that idea whose time has not yet gone. So it's a battle. And to imagine that these people who've devoted their entire lives to supporting a view of the past that is demonstrably completely erroneous. I mean, it's not that it's just a little bit wrong here and there. It's that it's totally false. For them to change their minds would be a kind of a spiritual enlightenment for them. And they're not about to do that. They will fight to the bitter end. And then at the very end, when they can't fight it any longer, there's a line that's sometimes attributed to Schopenhauer. I'm not sure who it was really, who talks about new ideas. And he says, first they'll laugh at you. First they'll ignore you. Then they'll laugh at you. Then they'll say that everyone has known it all along. So
my guest yesterday said that you'll know the pioneers because you'll see the arrows sticking out of their back, John.
That's a good line. Who said that?
Gregory Sams. He's
Oh, Greg, yeah. I never met him, but I know who he is, yeah. And also, well, an Air Force friend of mine once said about Sphinx theory that the flak is always heaviest when you're right over the target.
That's it.
There are a lot of good sayings on that book.
This is a beautiful book, The Traveller's Key to Ancient Egypt.
Why, thank you. Back to The Traveller's Key, right.
Hey, John, I have to get some of it in here. I mean,
sure.
I've actually forgotten about ancient Egypt. I've been 3 times, but it's been far too long, and I took this radio show on this year, and I'm glad I did because I'm learning a lot about ancient Egypt, but it's just...
Well, you have to come back on one of my trips.
I got to, John. I'm telling you, it's like, I've just been inspired. I mean, it's such a well laid out, structured book, John.
Well, it is.
It's not just a guidebook, John. It's like the who's who and what place to go and why. Yeah. It's why you want to go there. It's like, that must have a lot of time and energy to make this book, John.
Well, yes, I did, but I think it was 5 or 6 years went into it.
I was going to say, John, this is not knocked up in a weekend. This is like 500 pages of everything you want to know.
Unfortunately, it really needs an update in terms of, there's a certain amount of new Egyptology that's been discovered or that's developed since that book was written. The book came out in 85, and I think there was a bit of an update somewhere in the early 90s when the first printing went out. Mm-hmm. But all of the hotel stuff and all of that at the end is really completely outdated. Yeah. So
I wouldn't be worried about that though, John. I'm not worried.
No, but the Egypt stuff is still absolutely valid. Yeah, I mean everything that's in there is valid, but it needs some appendices and things to update it. But until it runs out of its edition, that's not going to happen, and they still have 1,000 or so copies left. And with Egypt, with Egypt being what it is these days, there are very few tourists there. I mean, this is the time to go to Egypt because it's practically empty.
Yeah.
And if the army succeeds in establishing a workable truce, you can bet the tourists are going to be flocking back in. So I'm actually trying to run as many trips as I can before that happens.
Gotcha.
And in fact, actually, we didn't talk about this, James. I didn't realize that. I don't think I realized that you've been to Egypt a few times. But yeah, you really do have to come with me. And I have an incentive offer.
When's your next trip, John? When are you going again?
Next trip is November 12th, 26th.
Oh, that could be.
And also, but from your point of view, how big is your audience?
Well, it depends which network. We go out on 2 networks, John. But yeah, anywhere between live shows, 4,000 listeners to it will be archived. It could be going up to 50,000.
Well, because I don't know how you're fixed financially, but I have an incentive offer. Blanket incentive offer that if you through your show get 10 people together, you get a freebie.
Nice. I'm going to be on the phone to everybody.
Well, that's yeah. I mean, you'd be surprised how difficult it is to get 10 people together. Everybody wants to go, or lots of people want to go. Nowadays, some people are afraid. Some people don't have the money. Some people don't have the time. So getting 10 people is not that easy, but it's doable. So if you promote it.
I got 2 people already, John. I got 2 dead certs that will go to drop of a hat. 20%.
Okay.
That's the start. So
okay.
I'm going to be on the phone straight after the show, but that's
okay. Didn't I tell you that? I didn't tell you that before?
You might have said it last time, John. I can't remember. So, John, tell me about this place, Tel El Amarna, because that's one place I definitely haven't been. Akhenaten's place.
Oh, well, you won't. If you go on my trip, you won't go there either because
is that out of bounds?
It's a nuisance to get to. It's in the middle. Well, it's in the middle of Egypt and in territory that's very much the fundamentalist strongholds are around there. So you tend not to go. You can go with an armed guard, but there really is
not much,
virtually nothing to see. And Akhenaten is a strange character. And in fact, if you read the chapter on Akhenaten in the guidebook, it's people are very rarely, how shall I say, are very rarely non-committal about Akhenaten. And I mean, when you see the extraordinary sculptures of him, either people think he's really creepy and almost demonic,
yeah.
And other people think that he's the great monotheist and has this wonderful rap and blah blah blah. For complicated reasons, when I first saw those statues in the flesh or in the stone, I mean, I really got the creeps from it. As a boy, I would rather have George W. Bush as my ruler than this guy. Which is saying a lot.
You're hilarious.
So anyway, but Tel El Amarna is not on the
track. Yeah, I look at the beat track.
It's way out of the way. You have to spend an extra day.
What's your favorite?
2 days really to get there. What?
What's your favorite place? I think Dendera would be your favorite place to go to.
No, no, actually it isn't. Dendera that's another place that evokes strong emotions one way or the other because it's very dark, and it's very late. And it's Ptolemaic, which is close to the time of Jesus and Caesar and so on. So the artwork is very corrupted, but it has a lot of power. But I have a number of favorite places. The Sphinx, of course,
yeah,
and Great Pyramid. The hypostyle hall at Karnak Temple. Philae, actually, even though it's Ptolemaic, it's this Isis temple, and it's this wonderful, feminine, fabulous place. Abydos for the incredible artwork,
yeah.
And Abu Simbel, the great temple of Ramses. All have, it's a bit like saying what's your favorite food if you're really a gourmand. And you like your food. It's hard to choose a favorite.
Yeah.
I mean, there's caviar and there's smoked salmon and there's, apple pie.
So, John, what's your typical trip? Because I never got into the details of your trip. What's your typical trip then, John?
Oh, go on my website. I mean, it's 14 days and we hit most of the major sites.
Right.
There's almost nothing that's really important that's left out. And we get out there at the crack of dawn. Even when there's nobody there, we get out there to be the first on the sites. And we're out there all day long. And me rambling along as I am here, we're doing that for 8-10 hours a day.
Awesome.
And at the end of the real thing is, and I've developed this over the year, over the 30 years that I've been doing the trips, there's a sort of a form in which, when we get to a site, whenever possible, it's not always possible at every site, but I always just give a little bit of a description of the temple and where it dates from and so on and who built it. And then I turn people loose for half an hour or sometimes 45 minutes to experience it, because the whole idea is to experience this sacred art, just as you wouldn't want to listen to a Beethoven-led quartet or a Bach chorale with a musicologist explaining the score to you as you're trying to listen. So with Egypt, you want to go where your sensibility takes you to experience it. And these things, it is really similar to listening to all of Bach and all of Beethoven and all of Mozart, one after the other.
You know what's different for me, John, when I've gone to Egypt on the 3 occasions? Something weird happens to me. It's like I'm home, and let me explain.
Yeah.
I go to all these places, John, the megalithic civilizations, Malta, all across Europe, and I've been to Peru in April there as well, looking at the ancient cultures there. And, I go to these ancient sites and I'm like dogmatic. I'm obsessed with the monuments and the engineering, how they were built. But I get so relaxed when I go to Egypt. I don't try to process it all. I appreciate the art there as well. And I haven't got an artistic bone in my body, John. I'm Mr. Engineer, Mr. Scientist, but.
Well, you're not actually, because you don't have your sensibility. Your head may be the engineer and the scientist, but obviously your emotional center is open, or you wouldn't respond to those places that way.
Exactly, and that's the thing. I respond to Egypt so quickly, and it's like bizarre. It's like this hypnotic effect on me, and I just like.
Well, lots of people do, and I don't know if you are a believer in reincarnation or not, but enough.
I am, yeah, big time.
Yeah, well, a lot of people, well, not a lot, but quite a number of people who come with me have very vivid reincarnational memories, and there are a few stories I tell them along the way in Egypt where there's really, you can't prove it physically, scientifically, but you would be, mistaken is the wrong word, but to not take them seriously means that you're just you're just a debunker, and with certain preset ideas about these things. Anyway, because Egypt has this special quality, there's no trip that I take ever where there aren't a handful of people who say, I've wanted to go to Egypt since I was 6 years old. And because Egypt has this peculiar, and it's not just romance, it has this draw that the other places don't have. And one of the reasons for that is that there's so much of it left. There's not that much, let's say China and India, probably Mesoamerica stretches back as far as Egypt, and was probably, given the data that we have, was probably equally sophisticated. And, they also had a sacred science, but there's not much that you can visit, that you can immerse yourself in. So at the end of Egypt, back to your original question, when you finish one of my trips, you really understand, for the first time in your life, because you wouldn't have got it anywhere else, what a functioning civilization is like. And contrasted to what I call our Church of Progress, you understand the diametric opposition between civilization and what our academics and Church of Progress priesthood like to call. These people think that they're advanced nowadays, and they're not. Actually, they're technologically advanced, but philosophically, emotionally, and spiritually retarded and depraved.
Here's the thing: I don't even think they're spiritually handicapped and technologically advanced in certain areas.
That's right.
But I think ancient Egypt was technologically advanced at an equal level. But only in certain areas.
That's right.
They had technologies, John, that, even the pyramid building, to build that pyramid, John, for me, as an engineer, I don't think we could do that, John. People say.
I don't think we could either. No. Well, this is.
We could.
No, and that's part of the fun when we go there. I don't know if you've seen this, but I spend a lot of time looking at these things, and when you have it right in front of your nose, it's no longer on the page. And suddenly you're looking. Did you get to the bent pyramid in Sure?
Sure, yeah. And again,
did you notice? Well, that's not in the guidebook, or hardly anything, because when I wrote the guidebook, that wasn't open to the public, so you couldn't get in there.
I think that was deliberate. I think they were tuning that thing with a frequency. I think that was definitely.
Well, something like that. But if you look at, if you probably wouldn't have noticed it yourself, and it's hard to describe on something that's a radio show, but the casing stones on the outer, outside the bent pyramid defy explanation. It's much more complicated than the Great Pyramid even. And one of the reasons why there's 60% of the casing stones still intact, because they're put in there in a way that defies explanation. And when I'm there with architects and engineers, because I'm often people with a lot of expertise are on my trips, they look at that and they marvel. And the academics who've never built a dry stone wall with their own two hands, it's as simply, it doesn't even occur to them that they're looking at something that is in fact technologically miraculous.
And John, isn't the Great Pyramid got 8 sides as well? It's got these two.
Well, yeah, it's got those. It's indented slightly each of the four sides is very gently,
Indented.
not curved in, but it's, yeah, I mean, I can't show it.
Very hard to describe it.
It is very gently eight-sided, yes.
That's incredibly complex to do, John.
I know.
It's bad enough on four sides, but I mean...
That's right. Yeah, everything, the deeper you get into it, the more amazing and miraculous it becomes.
After all your years, God knows how long you're researching, John, do I even say 40 years, 50 years?
Well, since I got introduced to Schwaller, I found out about him probably in 68, so what's that? Yeah, so that's over 40 years. Yeah.
A long time, John. In those 40 years, have you come to any conclusions or conclusions? Have you come to any conclusions about maybe these guys were so spiritually advanced, maybe they had a different way teaching symbolically, and maybe that synchronized the hemispheres of their brain, or maybe their consciousness was evolved because of the way they did things, and was their spiritual advancements helping them?
Yeah, I think so. I think without that, they couldn't have built, they couldn't even have conceived of those things. And when you're there, you got to come on one of my trips, actually, James, because when you get it from, the horse's mouth, and we're there having a discussion right in the place, they're able to think in volume somehow or another. So, Goethe has this great line of architecture is frozen music. Well, that's not just poetically true, it's metaphorically true, it's physically true, because architecture is based upon harmony and measure and proportion and so on, the same as music is, except that the vibrations of a temple are not audible. They are, but they are perceived through our, let's say, our sensitive faculties. So when we're in an Ammon temple, there are certain numbers, let's say, chords that are associated with Ammon, number relationships, and a different one for Horus and a different one for Isis, for example. So when you're in these temples, you are actually accessing the cosmic principle. The gods are in fact, cosmic principles. To call them gods makes it all sound superstitious, as though the jackasses that built the hydrogen bomb and the bobblehead doll really know what they're doing. When you're in these places, you're actually resonating within to that particular cosmic principle, and then you can extrapolate from that, because even the ones that are in pretty good shape are still pretty ruinous. They're not as though they were when they were new, but this is why, as I said, you get 2 weeks of this, and looking at everything through symbolist eyes, and you really come out of it changed. I mean, a great line, Florence Nightingale, who wrote the best book, wasn't a book, with a bunch of letters back, it was published as a book called Florence Nightingale, Letters from Egypt, 1849-50, who has a line who said, writing back home to her parents and her family, and she said, one wonders how people can visit Egypt, can come back from visiting Egypt and live lives the way they lived them before. Great line. It's really true. It's a life-changing and life-affirming experience. And it continues to be for me. I've done 100 trips, and people say, well, don't you get bored? And I say, no, because I'm learning stuff all the time, and making this available to people and watching them,
figure things out, or
well, just watching them experience this awesome civilization that is so grossly misrepresented by the people who should be the ones who are representing it, which are the Egyptologists.
I have my good friend in London, Daniel. He's a Cancerian as well, and he's an engineer, so he's keen to go for another trip to Egypt.
Well, get 10 people together and you get a 50.
I reckon I could get a few numbers anyway, but I'm just looking in the book here, John. You got the L-shaped cornerstones in there as well.
Oh, sure, yeah.
These are fascinating, John, and I've seen similar things in Peru as well.
That's right, Peru. You see them.
Yeah, it's just an acoustic effect, John. There's only really an acoustic reason for doing that. Would you agree?
No, I think there's that. I think that's one of the reasons that acoustic. I think there's another reason that it's
symbolic.
That it's symbolic, but it's actual. In other words, the temple. There's no real word for temple in Egyptian. It's called Per Neter, which means the home or the house of the god, or the house of the principle. And in other words, it's organic. So a corner is not a regular corner the way we do it. In other words, it's an energetic structure. The energy is running through the temple. And so it's a stone articulation, as it were. It's insofar as you can reproduce an ankle or a wrist in stone, that's what it's doing. It has a kind of an organic and integral function, as well as, and probably almost certainly, sound engineers have pointed this out to me, that it has a very pronounced acoustic effect. And of course, when these temples were functioning, there's also, it was very celebratory. There's music being played and there's dance going on, all sorts of things of this nature. Yeah.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, those corners are miraculous, and it's next to impossible to describe them on a radio show.
Sure. Yeah, the effort to build, John, the effort to build in that way had a
Yeah.
very, very important intent. You know?
Oh yeah, well it's, this is, as I said, it's one thing after another when you're there, and all of these things that we point out and marvel at and look at and discuss and, try to figure out, you never get from, no guidebook, no standard scholarly book of Egypt even mentions this.
Sure. The last time we spoke, John, we were talking about your DVD series, Magical Egypt, the Symbolist.
Right.
And I see echoes in the book as well, John, and the diagrams and the layout, the Temple of Man in particular. With
Sure.
the overlaying of the body.
Well, this precedes by a lot, the Magical Egypt series.
Yeah, that's why I see echoes in there, John, it's...
Oh, well, yeah, sure. Well, that was the whole idea of the series, which is, in fact, if you can't go to Egypt, it's the next best thing to it.
Yeah, I think it inspires people to go, John. I think when people see Magical Egypt, the Symbolist tour, they get inspired to go, John.
Oh, they do? Oh, yeah, I get people all the time. Yeah.
I haven't...
Which they can order, actually, you might as well tell people, they can order direct from me at a nice discount. If it's normally about, I think, $175 for the set.
Right.
And I sell them for $120.
Awesome. That's on jawest.net.
Yeah, plus the postage, which unfortunately to Ireland or Europe is another $25 or $30, something like that.
Sure.
But anyway, people can't get them direct from me, as well as the books, of course. But the books you can get through Amazon UK.
And you can subscribe on your website as well, John, can't you, for Egypt?
Well, yeah, you can subscribe to, you get on my mailing list, and then you get, are you on it?
No, well, actually, I'm going to be on it. I just seen it today when I was on your website, John.
Oh yeah, you want to get on that because, I send out Egypt updates periodically, very periodically, because I'm very inefficient at that. But when you sign on, you get this extraordinary compendium weekly of articles relating to Egypt archaeology, general science, that's put together because Graham Hancock, has been really successful. He's made a lot of money from his books, and he hires a guy named Steve Detweiler, whose whole job is to research everything that's new and important in the various sciences, not just archaeology and Egyptology, but ecology, environment. It's an invaluable resource, and he sends that out every week. And if you're on my mailing list, you get that automatically coming to you.
Awesome.
Yeah, you should click on my website, James, and you'll start getting it. It's really.
I'm going to do that straight after the show, John.
It's an invaluable resource.
It looks that, yeah.
Yeah.
John, tell me about these phases of the moon on the bottom of the pillars.
Yeah.
This is fascinating, John.
Well, it is.
And is this to do with is this not the part that represents the lungs, the waxing and the...
It represents the lungs, and the Nile is portrayed, in Egypt. When you see the figures that are uniting, it's so hard to describe this because it is so visual, that they're uniting Upper and Lower Egypt. They're uniting it on both sides of the Nile, and the Nile is portrayed as a trachea and a set of lungs, symbolically. So in other words, the Nile, there is this association between, the lungs are what you breathe through, but the lungs are water as well. In other words, the Nile is the breath of Egypt, as it were. And so water is always, in all cultures, associated with the moon. And there are other associations of the moon as well. So in the area that corresponds to the lungs, they've carved the phases of the moon into the bases of the columns. And this is a brilliant Schwaller revelation. This is one of the most powerful pieces of evidence that Schwaller knows what he's talking about with his symbolist theory, because there are hypostyle halls in every temple, but only in this one does it actually represent the lungs of the cosmic man, the anthropocosm, as Schwaller calls it. And of course, the phases of the moon, you might say, are the breath of the Nile, or the breath of the land. And so only in this temple are the phases of the moon carved in the bases of the column. And if the academics don't like that explanation, they should be honor bound, except they're not very honorable people. They should be honor bound to give some alternate explanation of why anybody would carve the phases of the moon into the bases of the columns. It's a very important piece of evidence.
I think that's extremely important. Not only that, John, is there not an astrological, some sort of a link with that as well? I thought Cancerians, the lungs, the breasts, the moon...
Well, the lungs are usually associated with Gemini, astrologically, but Schwaller does go into that. I don't have it that clear in my head. He thought, I'm not sure that Schwaller makes mistakes too. I'm not sure that he's correct in this, but he thinks that on the various parts that correspond to the various parts of the body, there are representations that correspond to the signs of the zodiac, which in Egyptian times, which are not exactly necessarily the signs of the zodiac that we use, that come to us from the Greeks, who get it from the Babylonians, I think. I'm not sure. Anyway, that's an area I'm a bit fuzzy about.
Yeah, no, it's just because I have been told Cancerians were the lungs, and somebody else said no, Geminis, and so I actually have heard that Gemini thing before, but
yeah, that's, I think, standard traditional Western
astrology.
I think it is Gemini that the lungs. I'm not sure. Again, even though my first non-fiction book was called The Case for Astrology.
I found it today online, John. Would you believe it? I found a copy today online. I'm going to get a copy because I want to know.
Oh, you got it. Yeah, it's out of print, but actually, I'm about to republish it.
Really?
Self-republish the Case for Astrology. Yeah. In fact, I'm in the process. Shock and I have this book of Sirah to do, but really, I don't have that much more original research to do in Egypt. It really goes now to people who are much more specialized than I am.
Yeah.
I brought to it, I made it accessible, and because I'm a writer by trade, I have the gift of expression, which is most scholars do not really have. Hancock's a very good journalist, but he's not the same kind of writer, and Boval does very well. I don't necessarily go along with everything that Boval says, but, for somebody where English is his third language, he does very well.
He's learning another one as well. He's learning.
But I because I'm a writer first and foremost, there's a kind of, there's satire. Anyway, it's more like reading a novel than.
What do you think of Chris Dunn's work?
I think he's onto something. But Chris, I know well. He's been on a couple of trips. I think he's changed his mind that it's electricity, but that it's an energy structure. Absolutely, I go completely with him on that. The problem is that he is assuming that because it's an energy structure, there's some kind of physical technology that allows them to do this. And the problem with that is that there's no evidence for that. And we have an awful lot of evidence for in other words, there are technological feats at every step that we take in Egypt. But if there were a physical technology, you would have thought something would have been found. I mean, we have the musical instruments and we have everything they use to do carpentry and everything they use to farm with. But how did they do this technology? We don't know. And Chris, at least when I cut through them last, was still holding fast to the notion that there has to be some kind of a hard technology that allowed them to do this. And I'm not so sure. I mean, until I see evidence for the hard technology, there's no evidence. The evidence is that they did these wonderful things with a different technology, a soft technology, a consciousness-raising technology, something or another. I'll give you a little instance. A good friend of mine who died recently, a remarkable lady, who was the head of the Fortean Society in America. You know the Fortean Society? Fortean, not Freudian. F-O-R-T, Charles Fort.
I've seen something online about that.
Yeah, you want to look up. Anyway, she was the head of the Fortean. Fort was a guy who died in 1932, and he had a little bit of an income so that he didn't need a day job, and he spent his whole life looking through scientific journals and newspapers, looking for stuff that science couldn't explain and rubbing their noses in it. He was an interesting guy. But anyway, my friend Phyllis, and I often gave talks there. They were in Baltimore, in America. And I often gave talks there. And one day, so anything that was anomalous is material, is fodder for the Forteans. And so there'd be all kinds of UFO people and Bigfoot people giving lectures there and so on. And I would be there talking about Egypt. Anyway.
I know an author for Fortean Times. That's who I know.
Yeah. Oh, right. Yeah. The Fortean Times. That's right. You have the Fortean Times in England. It was a substantial publication. Anyway, Phyllis we were sitting having a dinner one night, and the subject came up of Uri Geller and the spoon bending and stuff. And I said, to me, the evidence seemed very good that he could do this, and the debunkers were after him all of the time. And Phyllis said, oh yeah, it's certainly true, because I can do it. And I said, well, really? And she said, yeah, I can do that. And I said, well, go ahead. And we're sitting at a table, and she called the waiter over and asked him to bring a soup spoon, a very heavy, strong soup spoon. And soup spoon came, and I mean, this could not have been premeditated. I defy any debunker to debunk this one. And she just took the spoon, she closed her eyes and got sort of meditative with it and sort of stroked the spoon back and forth between her fingers for maybe a minute or so, or 2 minutes maybe. It wasn't long. And then she just took the spoon and effortlessly turned it into a spiral. And when I tried to unspiral the spoon, I mean, it took every bit of strength, and I couldn't unbend it. So that when I saw that, I said, well, maybe that's how something analogous to that they did. They had a way of working with matter in a way that we can't do. But she could bend the spoons. So yeah, I think there's some sort of alternative technologies that that can be done with the human mind and don't require a particle accelerator.
Sure. I know from my own science, I read science magazines sometimes, John, and I know they did an experiment with scientists in white coats. They stood around beryllium atoms that they contained in a magnetic field, and they willed the beryllium atoms to heat up, and they could measure their temperature rise just by people willing them to heat up.
Ah, that would interest me. I'd like the reference to that.
I can't remember the article, and I'll try and hunt it down.
Yeah, and yogis and martial arts masters do things that you or I probably can't do.
Sure. Yeah, and that's the thing, John. Maybe you're right. Maybe we just don't have the physicality to things all the time. And
yeah,
we do know for sure though that these guys were spiritually advanced, and they were.
They couldn't have designed. I mean, the people who design a bobblehead doll cannot design a Temple of Luxor. In order to design it, I mean, they had to know the laws and the rules.
Yeah, in a way, the spirit, the science, and the art was all mixed into one, John. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, that's what a true civilization. Egypt is a true civilization in which art, religion, science, and philosophy form one inextricable whole.
Mm-hmm.
They're not separate things as they are now, where scientists know nothing about art. Most artists know nothing about science. Philosophy is no longer exists. And religion is, for the most part, entirely corrupted and depraved.
Mm-hmm.
And they're all separate from each other. In Egypt, it's the opposite.
The Book of the Dead, John, where they talk about the weather, feather of truth, and the weighing of the heart, and all these that you go through and stuff. And I always wonder, John, is that pretty much accurately true? Did they have a way to perhaps map this, John?
Oh, I don't know about if they're mapping it, but the weighing of the heart becomes Judgment Day in Christianity. Christianity at its best is a kind of remedial Egypt. It's Egypt without the science. But, but again, with the crackademics, it's always the Egyptians believed this, or the Egyptians believed that, wink, wink, nod, nod.
Yeah.
It never occurs to them that, hey, maybe the Egyptians knew. I start, again, Bible, Matthew, by their fruits you shall know them. So, you want to know about a civilization, you look where they put their creative energy. The people that created the Temple of Luxor and the pyramids and the Sphinx and so on are at a level of spirituality that the people who created the hydrogen bomb and the bobblehead doll are not. This is a given. You can't prove it scientifically, but if you don't believe it, or if you don't resonate to it, you're an idiot. I mean, you're fooling yourself. Sure, they can only do these things if they're spiritually advanced. And they're only spiritually advanced not because they believe it, but it's a practice, it's a discipline. Religion is actually a discipline. It's something you do. It doesn't matter what you believe.
For me, John, I looked at ancient Egypt and I've developed my own spiritual belief because of an ancient culture, really. I mean, I've looked into ancient Egypt and ancient histories around the world, and I developed my own sense of spirituality as a result. I think this is insane, that this is what you have to do in this world. It's insane. And I'm guessing you're the same, John. This is where your own spirituality are.
Oh, very much so. Well, it's what, I'm in a Gurdjieff group and have been for years and years and years. And Gurdjieff, very interesting guy. I mean, if I would have, that's my school, as it were. I tell people about it, but I certainly don't try to get converts or anything like that. But Gurdjieff talks basically about spirituality in the sense he calls it a magnetic center. And if you haven't developed that magnetic center, which happens sort of accidentally as you're growing up. I mean, a magnetic center is if you resonate to, let's say, a Bach chorale or a Temple of Luxor or a Cathedral of Chartres. I mean, in England you still have Ireland I'm not so sure of, but if you have any Gothic cathedrals there, but in England there are still a few. You walk into these places and you're hit by it. That's your magnetic center awakening. In other words, that's spiritual. It's not gangster rap. And so enough experiences of that sort, and you find your way. I mean, here we are talking about this stuff. If it didn't resonate with these things, I wouldn't be on your radio show, and you wouldn't have such a radio show.
Exactly, John. Exactly.
I mean, there's nobody in the American Congress who has a radio show where they talk about anything that is spiritual, or anything that is ancient, or anything that is in fact meaningful.
Sure. And this is the thing. This is what I do, John. I look for answers in ancient history, and Egypt gives me so much, though. This is the thing. I mean, all roads head to Egypt for me. I mean, other ones do in a little way, and I think there's anomalous cultures out there, and they're great to research and stuff like, but Egypt just keeps on giving. It just keeps on giving.
Well, it does, and it's also a personal thing. I mean, some people, for example, the Eastern religions are nowhere near as corrupt and depraved as the Western ones. I mean, there are still practicing, lots of practicing Buddhists, practicing yogis and so, but it's not, the Tibetan monks are still really doing their practices, but it doesn't resonate to me, personally. Egypt does. but they're alive. But those who, just as if you're taking music, one person will like Beethoven more than Mozart, and somebody else will like Stravinsky better than Beethoven. But I mean, because we have our innate preferences, that's fair enough. But I think you can say without much argument that Egypt is the most spectacular manifestation of a spiritually based civilization that we have. And on the trips you really see this, because it's day after day after day after day. You go around Europe to the great Gothic cathedrals, they're few and far between, and they're basically the same. In other words, they're all consecrated to mostly they're Gothic, to the Virgin Mary. They're very powerful places, but they don't make up, you might say they don't make up a coherent whole, and for good reason, because I mean, they were put up in the middle of a lot of barbaric stuff going on. And Egypt wasn't. Egypt had a particular blessed situation in which they were almost unsusceptible of they had a doctrine in place that was satisfying to the soul. They had a physical situation where the food jumped out of the ground. I mean, people didn't have to, they had 3 months of the year or 4 months of the year where you couldn't work because it was all flooded. So you could build temples and do all of these wonderful things. And then, because they were, almost invulnerable to attack, they had hundreds of years of peace without really being disturbed. So it had a unique physical situation that allowed them to perpetuate this extraordinary spiritual doctrine and to manifest it in all of this wonderful sacred art and architecture.
Sure. And do you think then, John, I suppose, call it 3000 BC, when things came into full effect until about 1500 BC, not questioning the Sphinx, that's its own entity, I think, but around the time of, the Middle Kingdom and that, when it fell, around the time of Akhenaten, did it all turn at the Akhenaten stage?
No, it was going, it was sort of like waves on the shore where it's going downhill gradually, ending up in Rome, which is a three-ring bureaucracy. I mean, Rome is a terrible civilization, and that in turn gives way to the Dark Ages, which were really pretty dark. Not as dark as they paint them. But Egypt certainly was at its height at its beginning, but it didn't come out of the blue either. Again, this is a fairly complicated subject, and we're
just about
we're not running out of time. I'm starting to run out of breath.
You're all right. We are out of time anyway, so we won't go too deep in.
Anyway, but there was a recent wonderful show at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York I think it was called Origins of Egyptian Art, and it was a beautifully curated show where they brought together things from the pre-dynastic period, going back to about 4500 BC, and were extremely refined, and because they were the person writing the curator or whoever writing the explanation cards was sort of talking about they're representing animals because those are the animals that were around them. No, it's quite clear that the animals that they're representing, hippopotamuses, crocodiles, jackals, and so on, that the Egyptian doctrine, the Egyptian gods, are already in place in those earlier periods, and the workmanship is exquisite, hard stones and all of that. So,
sure.
Lots more.
Sure.
So,
John, leave it at that. We leave it at that because we could talk forever. But John, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. Give us out your website one more time, and if you have
it, website is jawest.net or .com, jawest.net or jawest.com. Yeah. And if you go down there, you'll see a place where you can sign up to get on my mailing list. Yeah. And I have to the next trips that are devoted to the trips. I'll have the information, the revised information. If you go to what's on there now, refers to the trips, the last trips, but basically the same trip.
That's early November.
And coming up in November, 12th of November to the 26th, and another one in March. So if James gets 10 people together,
please, John, please, God,
you get a trip to Egypt, which will be guaranteed a life-changing experience.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it, John. I really am. And I have a travel fund at the moment.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I'm working on my own travel fund, so it's going.
Oh, good. Okay. What kind of an engineer are you?
I'm actually, I have several qualifications in engineering. I did a diploma in electrical engineering, and I did a degree in mechanical and a master's in mechanical engineering.
Oh.
And I've also a degree in physics with astronomy, and I've
really?
And a master's of science research and society.
Oh.
But most of what the heading that I worked under was systems analyst. So.
Oh, really? Ah.
Yeah, and mostly heavy industrial engineering, John.
Oh, really? Is that your day job?
No, I don't really do that anymore. I've took a 2-year sabbatical to be an author, John, and the radio host thing came about because of authors that I met, and I said I might as well do a podcast. So it's taken a life of its own. It's doing really well, and
that's good.
I've had like Graham Hancock on, Robert Boval, yourself, Shock.
Right.
I've done the rounds with everybody like so far this year. I've done 60 shows, John, already this year. 60 shows.
Yeah, well, a couple of others you should do. You should do Laird Scranton.
I have Laird done already, and he's coming back on. He gave me his.
Yeah, Laird is very good. You might want to get in Norman D. Ellis, who knows, a wonderful writer and has done Awakening Iris and a number of other books.
Just writing that down.
Norman D. Ellis, Jeremy Nadler,
Jeremy Nadler. I ordered his books already. He's coming.
Good. Yeah, Jeremy Nadler.
I have $150 of books coming to the house a month, John.
Oh, okay. Oh, Jocelyn Godwin, Jocelyn, he's English. So only the English would have a guy named Jocelyn.
What was it? Jocelyn?
Jocelyn, Joscelyn.
Yeah.
Godwin, Godwin, who wrote many, many books. He's a musicologist, but he's written the book about Atlantis called Atlantis and the Cycles of Time. And he teaches in where does he teach? Here in America.
John, when I was doing a physics degree,
University. Yeah.
I was doing a physics degree. One of the guys asked me what I did for fun as a hobby, and I told him I'm an Atlantis hunter. I searched for Atlantis, and I said it as a joke, but he never spoke to me ever again, John. Ever again.
Jocelyn's book is the complete Atlantis book. If you don't know anything else about Atlantis, it's all in there, and it's very balanced. He's a very brilliant guy.
Sounds interesting.
He's written knowledgeably about a lot of things. Google him up. You'll go to Amazon. He's written a number of things. He's a professor at Colgate University in New York State. And he'd be a good guy to get. He's very knowledgeable.
John, that's 2 good tips for the show.
Good.
That's the best way to get referred as well, John.
Well, it is, sure.
John, I'm going to have a serious think about that now, this November trip. And, I know you're a busy guy as well, but I'm going to sign up for the website. I have that now in the list of things to do. I'll do that right now. And I'll talk to you in the not too distant future, hopefully, yeah?
Sure, well, with a bit of luck, see you in Egypt in November.
With a bit of luck, John, please God, I'm actually going to take November and December off because I just want to switch off from the show.
No better place to go than Egypt because it's you'll see it in a very different way. Yeah.
2 weeks in Egypt would cure me, and I never did the proper tour, John. I only ever went on my own, and I never wanted to go on those cruise ships, John.
No, they're terrible.
I know. It's like fuck that, Jesus.
Yeah. Well, actually, depending if I have a dedicated trip like the group, I'll be doing a trip at the end of January.
Yeah.
Mohammed, the guy who does my trip for me, has the best. It's tiny. It's a little private boat.
Sure.
With 8 cabins in it.
Nice.
Called the Dahabeya. And if I can get that, he gives it to me for the usual price if the boat is free.
Yeah.
But that's like having a private yacht, and it's got a sail.
Yep.
You go sailing up the Nile. It's sort of it's descended from the actual, pharaonic boats.
Yeah.
And there are a number of those on the thing, but the big cruise boats, no.
Yeah, I watched the program with Joanna Lumley, and she was on one of those Nile cruises.
Yeah.
My God, the entertainment on board would have just turned my stomach. It was terrible.
That depends, actually. Anyhow, I don't do those big boats anymore because there are too many of them. I used to, because I found it very difficult to sell the trip without the Nile cruise because it has this glamour and allure to it, and it really isn't, because you're only sailing a day and a half, and the rest of the time you're on a floating hotel. You're better off being in a regular hotel.
Sure.
But with the Afondina, with Mohammed's boat, that's different. That's a different experience.
Sure. John, I look forward to your next publication as well with yourself and Dr. Shock. That sounds very interesting. And
that'll be a while, but not too long, because we're gearing up for it. Sure. And I will have the time to work on it, which I haven't had the last few years.
Sounds interesting, John.
Okay, James.
You're a busy man. I'll let you go.
I am, and thank you. Very good, James. Good talking to you.
You too. Look after yourself now.
You too.
Bye now.
Take care. Bye-bye.